The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, I'm Carl Seidel, host of The People's View. The show is sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee, and if you like to attend our meetings, they're the second Thursday of every month at 6:30 at the Crown Plaza. And if you want to find out more about our organization, you can go to nashuagop.org to see our website and learn about the events that we have.
Welcome to The People's View.
Hello, and help me welcome Neal Kurk, who's representative and chair of the House Finance Committee. Neal, welcome aboard. I hear you have a favorite little talk for one of our constitutional convention that's on the ballot.
You're right, Carl. There are two questions on this year's ballot. Both of them would amend the Constitution. There's question one, which deals with standing for taxpayers to bring lawsuits so that they can get into court and challenge laws that they feel are inappropriate. But the second one is question number two, and that deals with privacy. And let me read the language because it's short.
Sure.
An individual's right to live free from government intrusion in private or personal information is natural, essential, and inherent. Right now, there are some constitutional privacy protections. For example, we have the right under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution and Article 19 of our Constitution to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures of our personal property and our homes and our things in them, our papers, physical things. But there is no comparable protection for other kinds of things in this technological age which were never conceived of at the time the Constitution was written. For example, a lot of the information that you and I generate is stored in the cloud. We have DNA. We have we have texts. We have emails. All of these things, which we today consider normal and natural, were not conceived of 200 some odd years ago.
They didn't have the technology. No.
Right. So the question is, to what extent are those kinds of activities, that kind of information, protected from government intrusion? And the answer, according to the United States Supreme Court, is not really. What they've done is to say, we'll protect your privacy on two grounds. Number one, if you have an expectation of privacy. You've done something to show that you want this to be confidential. For example, you've closed the door to your house or you've pulled down your blinds. And the second thing is this expectation reasonable? The problem is that the court and most people have a very different expectation or interpretation of what's reasonable. I don't expect my emails to be public. I don't expect my DNA to be public. If I go into a restaurant and drink out of a cup, paper cup perhaps, and I leave it on the table, my DNA is in there. If I use a fork on the restaurant and leave the fork on the table to be cleaned in the restaurant's dishwasher, my DNA is on that fork. And just because I've drank from a cup or eaten using a fork, I don't expect the government to be able to go in and take my DNA. Similarly with respect to my emails. But that's not what the courts have decided. They've said that it's unreasonable for me to have an expectation of privacy in those areas. And I think that the disparity between what you and I as individuals expect and what the courts expect is so far apart that we need to take action to change that. And that's what this amendment does. It prevents government intrusion into privacy of, let's say, modern technological activities and things that are not covered in the traditional interpretation of the Fourth Amendment. That's what this does. Doesn't apply to the private sector, doesn't apply to Google or anyone like that. It only applies to governments trying to get information about us and use it for whatever purpose. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean the government can't get your DNA and can't get your emails. But it would require that they go to court and get a warrant for that and demonstrate that there is probable cause for them to believe that a crime has been committed or there is some overriding government purpose that's served by their collecting this information. If the court agrees, then they can get it. In other words, it's not that we're saying government can never get this information. We're saying that the court has to change the standard that it uses to determine whether government should have it.
And that's just in that one specific case. It's not in general.
It would apply to all sorts of cases involving information that we have, no matter what the form is. As I say, it wouldn't prevent government from getting the information, but it would require them to meet a very high standard to justify getting it. So if the government wanted to create a DNA database of all New Hampshire citizens in order to help solve crimes or for some public safety issue, they would have to make the case to the court, and there would be people, of course, who would oppose this, that the government purpose is so important that the invasion or intrusion into our privacy is justified. And that's, I think, a fair thing, because we can't figure out tomorrow what's going to be so important. Each decade comes along and our standards change and our judgments change. But at least what we've said here is that the courts have to accept ordinary people's concept of what's important and invade that, get to their personal information only if there is an exceptionally strong public interest in having that information.
And that's very specific at that time.
Yes.
Because you got to make the justification based on this situation.
Whatever the information they're seeking at the time they're seeking it, they would have to justify this.
And now, or right now, are we having a lot of problems where the government's gone too far? Can you... I mean, there's always something that's in the paper, you know, say all these different investigations that are going on. How much of that information is supposed to be private in some cases and not private without the warrant?
I wish I could answer that question and tell you specifically the government is or is not using that, but I can't. The purpose of this amendment is to make sure that it doesn't happen. In the legislature, where you and I both serve, we've passed a number of statutory measures to try, on a piecemeal basis, to deal with crises as they arise. But this is a general principle. This is a general statement of how we want the relationship between the individual and our state government to proceed. And so it's not designed to cover a particular situation that may have arisen. That's what statutes are for. This is designed to take care of a general concept, just like the First Amendment talks about freedom of the press and religious liberty. We're setting forth a very important basic principle that's not specific enough to be justified by any particular situation, but it's general enough to cover all of them. And then we have a debate when a particular situation arises, is this covered by the First Amendment? Is this covered by the Fourth Amendment? And we make up our minds at that time. But we have those principles in our Constitution to protect us.
And both houses of our legislature have voted for this, both amendments.
Yes, in order to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot, 60% of the House, of those members present and voting, and 60% of the senators, those members present and voting, must vote in favor. And that happened in this case, or it wouldn't be on the ballot. When it goes to the voters, 2/3, 67% of those voting have to approve this in order to amend the Constitution. And that's a very high standard.
It is, and I think the people have to know, too, that they have to vote, or they should vote, because a blank is going to be a nay. Is that right? Because if they've marked the ballot...
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
If you don't mark your ballot, it doesn't count toward the 2/3. It's 2/3 of those who are present and voting on the issue.
But,
so if you don't take a ballot and don't vote, that does not affect the outcome.
But if you do vote on other things that are on the ballot, not the Constitutional Convention items, that was my understanding anyway. I thought
I had a different understanding, but you may be right. I thought that they looked at the yeas and the nays, and if the yeas were 2/3 of the total of the yeas and nays, then the measure passed. But Secretary of State Gardner, I think, will have to inform me anyway. I could be wrong on this.
Well, we'll check that out and find out for our audience anyway, because people have asked me that question, and I've been in situations where committees have said that on some of their votes, that a blank is a no vote. But in any case, when you have a 2/3 type of situation.
I always thought a blank was an abstention and it didn't count, but you could be right.
We'll find out.
And please let me know.
Okay, we'll do that. But I know privacy has been a big objective of yours in a lot of legislation in the past. Do you think this is worded then correctly enough not to have a problem with people challenging it if it does pass? And what would that mean if they went to the U.S. Supreme Court?
There's no question that should this pass, it will have an impact on activities in New Hampshire, just like the First Amendment does, and the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. Those are federal amendments. And this certainly would have an impact in any particular case that deals with these kinds of information, and if a person feels his privacy has been invaded. But as I said before, it's really on a case-by-case basis, and this is no different from any of the other general-purpose amendments that we have.
So you don't picture any problems
No, and I think, frankly, I hope both amendments pass, because I think they both serve a very good purpose.
Right.
The Amendment number 1 allows people to challenge government action based on the fact that they pay taxes. And the second one allows people to challenge government actions if the government, they believe, is invading their privacy by looking at their emails, checking out their DNA, and keeping dossiers on them. It's really designed to prevent government snooping where it has no place to go. Where government has a reason to collect this information, it will be collected, and I think all of us would agree that the general welfare may require some of us to make some sacrifice. But I hope that will be in very rare cases.
Well, I would hope so too. But now that you decided not to run, what are you going to be doing after they implement all this?
I'm like most New Hampshire people. Politics is in my blood, and there's no way that I will not be calling you and others up to say, hey, Carl, you got to vote this way on that particular amendment. And I hope all of your constituents do the same thing, so that you can truly represent them. If people don't call us and let us know how they feel, well, we try to sense what's in the public interest and vote that way. But it's always good to know that there are 15 or 20 or 50 people who have called and said, Neal, Carl, on this bill, I'd like you to vote this way. I think that makes us better representatives.
Well, I agree with you, and that's part of the reason we have this show for the last 6 years, is to get people a place that they can come to hear about what's the rest of the story, if you will, on some of these things that are going through our legislature. But I know you're going to have an interest no matter where you are.
Yeah, I will, and I think, as I said, that many people in New Hampshire, I think a disproportionately large number, especially since we're the first in the nation presidential primary state, are interested in politics and speak up.
Right.
In my hometown of Ware, we have a number of gadflies who are always attending selectmen's meetings, who are always calling their representatives, me included, who have something to say. And it's very hard to go to the supermarket or one of our local stores and not meet somebody who says, hey, Neal, why did you vote that way? And I really have a problem. How about this? And I think that's great. It's part of our community.
Well, you've served well, so I know people really respect you here for all the years you've put in. And I know you'll be back in sometime, one way or another. So thank you very much, Neal, for this nice story about this amendment. And we'll have somebody else talk about Amendment 1, too. And this is going to be on this TV show in Nashua and on YouTube so that people can get all this information the week before the election.
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you again.
Pleasure, Carl. Nice to be here.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.